I think the recording started.
Right. Well, good afternoon. We're back in session. Charlotte, we've had a rearrangement of site SA23, haven't we? You're muted.
Yes, sorry. Yes, potentially, as long as everybody's in agreement, I'm going to write to everyone now and check.
Right. Okay. So stand by for a SA23 going back probably to next week.
Yep.
Right. Did anybody else want to say anything on Little Romans 1 before I move on to local needs in towns and villages? So Oliver Bell and David Murray Cox, did you want to speak on Little 1 or Little 2?
My point, there's a slight overlap, to be honest. It's kind of generally in respect of point 1, but it does overlap because it's specific to Haywards Heath in terms of being about local needs as well.
Why don't you come on and say your piece then?
Fine, okay. So yeah, it was just really in terms of our position in terms of a level of growth at Haywards Heath, as we don't consider that approach aligns with the district plan. So just to recap, so policy DP4 does not provide any strategic direction as to how the minimum category 1 settlement requirements should be apportioned. Now, there's of course been reference to table, I think it's the unnumbered table on page 37 of the district plan in terms of settlement specific numbers, but that doesn't form part of policy, and the district plan inspector in his report, and just for your reference, Inspector, it's at paragraph 33. He was clear that that was provided for the context of the preparation of neighbourhood plans, rather than looking at housing distribution at a district-wide level. And the council has themselves accepted that that is not a figure which is suggesting that that is deliverable within each of those settlements. So moving on to DP6, that then sets out in part as a strategic objective is to provide the right amount of housing that meets the needs of all sectors of the community. And I just wanted to pick on that point because that's covered in our Regulation 19 representations to SA11. And in figure 1 there, we do some demographic analysis where we look at the census and ONS data for Burgess Hill and for Haywards Heath, which demonstrates that historically those two settlements have broadly accommodated a similar level of population in the district, about 21% each. In figure 3 of our Regulation 19 representations, we show how the district plan and also the site allocations plan will then fundamentally change that position. Now that of course has been established to some degree through in the context of focusing strategic growth at Burgess Hill. But our concern is that the site allocations plan is unjustifiably exacerbating this change through a continuation of disproportionately high levels of additional growth at Burgess Hill relative to Haywards Heath. So our view is that when looking at the residual growth of which is to be covered under the site allocations plan, the apportionment should now better reflect demographic housing stock trends and of course other sustainability criteria, but in particular to ensure that Haywards Heath can continue to maintain its role in the district and meet local housing needs and support existing services and facilities in accordance with policy DP6. And our analysis of that is in terms of the level of growth necessary set out in figure 4 of our Regulation 19 reps to SA11. And we consider that to achieve that level, the appropriate level of growth, there should be approximately 357 units allocated to Haywards Heath as opposed to the current figure of 25. And I should add that we consider that there are suitable, available and achievable sites to deliver that, including those controlled by my client. Thank you.
Thank you for that. David Murray Cox, please.
So it's just a very short point, but it's one of wanting to avoid unintended consequences, perhaps, because you've heard this morning and also yesterday quite a number of comments about the role of the AO&B in Mid Sussex and whether or not that should be a location for growth, whether that's minor or major. I mentioned yesterday the unmet needs of Crawley and the manner in which the surrounding authorities to Crawley have responded to Crawley's draft local plan. Essentially, Mole Valley, Reigate and Banstead unable to accommodate the unmet needs, and the Tandridge local plan doesn't do so either. Essentially, that leaves Horsham and Mid Sussex, and the vast majority of Mid Sussex boundary with Crawley is within the AO&B, and there's obvious spatial benefits of locating unmet need arising from one authority as close and accessibly to that settlement as possible. That's the point which has come out in the examination of local plans in Oxfordshire, for example, where there's a much greater degree of unmet need, actually. But the reality is that the district plan is one which has already directed growth to the edge of Crawley on that basis by virtue of the Peas Pottage allocation to the east of the M23, which is for 600 dwellings. And obviously you've heard a lot about what this plan should or should not do, but the one thing I would suggest that it certainly should not do is prejudice the ability of Crawley to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak on Roman numeral 2? If the council wishes, we can go through all of these Roman numerals, and I'll give you a chance of mopping up at the end if you prefer that. So we'll move on to 3. Hello?
Sorry, sir. I was simply going to say I actually only have one comment there that I wanted to make in response, and I see from Mr. Marsh and Ms. Henstoff that they've got not much more either. So it might be helpful just to deal with this now, if that's okay with you, sir.
Of course.
I mean, if I don't go beyond that, it's not because we haven't got a reply, but I think actually you have got my I got my reply in first, and I'd simply be repeating it. So it's simply in response to the point Mr. Bell made a moment ago about distribution between Haywards Heath, Burgess Hill, and East Grinstead. And I just ask you to go back on this to MSDC 01, page 26, and table 2 there, where as between East Grinstead and Haywards Heath, you'll see, there are 25 sites for allocation for 25 units in Haywards Heath, as against 772 in East Grinstead in the site allocations DPD. And so the explanation for that is you go back and look at the previous column, the commitments and completions, and that is at the date of the site allocations DPD, there were already 2,600 commitments in Haywards Heath, as against only 1,700 in East Grinstead, in circumstances where under DP6, the minimum requirement for both those settlements was around 2,500. So in essence, what the site allocations DPD is doing is balancing that up so that both of them are there or thereabouts in terms of the original requirement. And that simply then leaves Burgess Hill. And so I'd say 2 things about Burgess Hill. The first is that if you take out the northern arc from Burgess Hill, then in every other respect, the overall numbers that Burgess Hill is being required or expected to contribute are around the same sort of level as you see for East Grinstead, Haywards Heath. You're around 2,500. I mean, the northern arc is a major strategic allocation. It's one of its a kind in that sense. And if and to the extent that anybody is suggesting that because these are all tier 1 settlements, they should all be treated equally. So it's true they're all tier or category 1, But if you go back to the plan, you will see in more than one place explicit references in it to the Burgess Hill being the main focus of development of district. As between those three, Burgess Hill is specifically singled out in the plan as being the top of the pile. So there is a very good reason there why development is focused on Burgess Hill. That's happened because that's what the district plan says we should be doing. And so that was the only point that I wanted to come back on at this stage.
Okay, thank you for that. So going to go through the local needs and onto little Roman numerals 3, which is on strictly controlling development in the open countryside. And the council say the district plan provides a clear framework for the protection of the countryside and protected landscapes. Grace mentioned that there's concern regarding the impact on SA12 and SA13, particularly on the setting of the national park. DHA planning states that there are sites in the countryside that are close to built-up sites, such as Courthouse Farm, that are well related to the highway network and sustainable. And Nexus planning say it's necessary to release greenfield sites to meet identified development needs. Dr. Ashley Bowes.
Thank you very much, sir. May I, in this section, just respond to a point that was made yesterday, or recall that we said, Mr. Grace told you that in his view, the site allocations plan has failed to adhere to one of the objectives of the district plan, which is to protect valued landscapes and particularly designated landscapes such as national park. And the response that you were given from the council through Mr. Brown was, well, you've got to read plans as a whole, which of course as a principle as it goes is completely correct. And particularly he drew attention to the fact that the district plan prioritises category 1 settlements, especially Burgess Hill, for meeting development needs of the district across the plan period. But what we'd say to that, and what that fails to account for, we say, is DP18, which is a development plan policy within the adopted district plan, which specifically requires the setting of the South Downs National Park to be protected and enhanced. And so what that means, we say in a nutshell, is that the strategy, including the point that Mr. Brown has just made to you about Burgess Hill being prioritised for development, could be met and should be met without compromising the setting of land which makes a valuable contribution to the national park. It's also worth noting, of course, that on page 37, a table you've been taken to a number of times, that Burgess Hill was given a significant amount of housing in line with the parts of the reason justification Mr. Brown took you to. But of course, beyond that, it wasn't envisaged that it would take any further housing at a strategic level. And of course, where that all comes to, and of course, that's just to foreshadow what we'll say tomorrow, but if you were to, having heard what we say tomorrow, agree with us and the South Downs National Park Authority, that there would be a level of harm to the national park as a consequence of SA 12 and 13 being allocated, particularly 13 from the national park's perspective, that by definition cannot be a strategy, a distribution strategy in accordance with the district plan strategy, because we know that notwithstanding it prioritised category 1 and Burgess Hill, it did that at the same time as requiring through express policy that the setting be preserved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll of course have South Downs National Park with us to let us know their view firsthand, as it were, but thank you for that. Any other points on the open countryside, Little Romans 3? If not, we'll come on to Little Romans 4, which is maximising the reuse of previously developed land or previously developed sites, which are sustainably located. Council's response is that there's little PDL potential in mid-Sussex, but such sites are encouraged where appropriate. Denton Homes acknowledged that sustainable brownfield sites are limited, which is why they have promoted the brownfield site at Pease Pottage, and they give the Sheila reference as 818. And Andrew Black has accepted again that PDL is very limited. So do we have any response to any of those points from the council or anybody else? Tim North.
Thank you, sir. The question really here is, if PDL land is also to include existing employment sites, and existing employment sites have not been looked at or assessed in terms of the contribution they're likely to make in the future to housing or any other form of development, then it seems to me that the idea that a full assessment of PDL sites has been undertaken is not true.
Thank you for that. Dr. Elena Griffiths.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. As in my submission, I've actually stated that Horsted Canes lies wholly within the AONB, and the two sites that have been allocated within the AONB are two green field sites of medieval origin. I believe that both of those allocations are not justified, as other previously developed sites have been ignored, which could have provided a highly sustainable alternative. The site I'm talking about is site 68, which I know intimately, and I've talked about previously as well. The site should be considered as previously developed land, as it's adjacent to existing housing, contiguous with the village, and currently occupied by dilapidated farm buildings, and as such is an obvious candidate for sustainable development in accordance with Mid Sussex's policy DP4, and also the potential to be a small scale development within the AONB as part of DP16. As I've mentioned in my previous comments to MIQ 1.1 subsection 2, the site was screened out at the stage 3 assessment due to perceived access issues, but these access assumptions are actually based on two factually incorrect conclusions. The site should not have been screened out of the process and should have progressed to be a realistic alternative to be tested by the sustainability assessment. The realistic alternatives comments are also backed up by my MIQ 2.2 comments regarding the failure of the use of realistic alternatives within Horsted Canes. There's no evidence-based reason or apparent rationale, professional judgment reason for excluding site 68, Jeffreys Farm buildings at stage 3, especially as the only alternatives that have been allocated are two greenfield sites over a previously developed site. The screening out of site 68 has been challenged on several occasions through regulation consultations over several years. Mid Sussex has given no response in the consultation reports to these comments made about the site selection paper 3, an absolutely critical screening step in this stage of the process. To screen out sites from the process and to not have any comments or not actually accept any comments or discussion on this means that that screening out is actually not being open to any challenge or scrutiny. In summary, the allocation of sites in Horsted Canes does not adequately fulfil the MPPF or the district plan policies DP6, as it provides little provision for the protection and enhancement of the environmental landscape or biodiversity, and through the allocation of greenfields over a previously developed site, which is there and available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on little 4? Right. Move on to little 5, which is regarding infrastructure needs in the accompanying IDP. And the council's comment is that strategic objective 6 is to ensure the development is accompanied by the necessary infrastructure. supported by the IDP and the Infrastructure Contributions SPD. Policy SA Gen makes clear that the proposed allocations are expected to contribute towards the necessary infrastructure provision in line with the overall strategy set out in the district plan to ensure that infrastructure needs are met. Grace Machin states the proposed allocation of sites SA 12 and 13 is not considered to accord with the principles of sustainable development and will result in an imbalance and harmful distribution of residential development in the district. This will create significant detrimental impacts upon the landscape, character, the setting of the SDMP, South Downs National Park, as well as assets of biodiversity and ecological value. A detailed list of the list of species again that you gave me before. Any comments on infrastructure from anybody? There's nothing else the council wish to say at the end of that section on distribution.
So not from me. I'll just check with Mr. Marsh whether there's anything he wants to come back on in relation, for example, to Ms. Griffiths or Mr. North.
Yes, thank you. In relation to Ms. Griffiths, we heard yesterday as well about the she found an error on our fact check. This, of course, for the site selection paper we published, we sent it to all of the site promoters for a fact check. And I can confirm that the point that she raised, I think in her matter statement about the transport issue, we did correct between the Regulation 18 version and the version that was updated for Regulation 19 with relation to the transport criterion, and that didn't change our assessment overall, didn't change the result of that assessment. In terms of Mr. North's point about previously developed land and employment sites, all employment sites in the district are in our SHELAR document. The ones that are currently in use with that viable continue to be viable are all within SA 34 for the protection policy, which we'll talk about on another occasion. There's nothing to stop any of those being submitted as a housing site. We recognise that Tim North did submit his site as a housing site for assessment, and it came out during the site selection process. So that doesn't preclude any of those sites being considered through this process. It's just that on this occasion we did not take that one through to the conclusion of allocation in the DPD.
That. Now 3.3 we're going to come back to in various stages over the next few days, weeks. So we move on to 3.4, which is the 5-year housing land supply. And the question there is, would the plan at adoption be able to demonstrate that it has a 5-year supply of specific, viable and deliverable sites to achieve the plan's requirements? Council state that as at April 2020, the council was able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and they did this at an appeal at Peacocks, Horsted Canes, where they put out a 5.37 years supply, and that the DPD will add another 575 units to that 5-year supply. Nexus Planning state that it's difficult to comment with lack of information relating to the trajectory and concerns relating to delivery assumptions for the Northern Arc. Hopefully that'll become a little clearer following our discussion this morning on what's going to happen. Turley state that no explanation again for the trajectory. The evidence does not show that the plan will maintain the 5-year supply at the point of adoption. Judith Ashton Associates question the delivery rate assumptions for the council. The assumed delivery rates on major sites need reference to the agreed position with those promoting these sites. it looks like a deficit of 406 units on major sites with planning permission. And again, hopefully what we've asked for this morning and the work on a statement of common ground will help us in these areas. Lichfields state they do not consider there's evidence to demonstrate that the plan will be able to provide a 5-year supply. The council should, at the earliest opportunity, publish an updated trajectory of sites within the updated base date, including the expected year-by-year completions from new allocations and evidence based on the step requirement beginning to take effect. That there are now fewer years left, obviously, yeah. The strategic sites have already been delivered, as we've heard, particularly the Northern Arc, and that the council has often overestimated its actual deliverable supply. And it's the final point from Lichfields that it's unlikely that many of the new larger allocations will be able to quickly bolster the council's 5-year supply. More supply therefore needs to be addressed. Denton Homes, we can't find evidence that illustrates how the housing trajectory in document H2 has been calculated, other than for the 4 strategic sites in document MSDC01. Andrew Black, it is important that the plan has resilience, and also a concern that planning permission for a further 19 sites comprising 1,393 dwellings will lapse by the end of 2021. So again, they'd like to be reassured that those sites are still realistic. Bradman Developments Limited, the council has only twice achieved the quantity of housing necessary to meet the initial steps requirement of 876 per year. The council is reliant on the small number of large strategic sites to meet the 5-year requirement, and its trajectory assumptions are optimistic. There is justification for the council to allocate further sites for residential development in order to ensure that the delivery of 16,390 new homes as required by policy DP4 can be achieved. So obviously a lot of those comments we can park in the sense that when we get the joint work done, hopefully with a statement of common ground, it will in fact answer a lot of those questions. But if there are any more comments at this stage that anybody wishes to make on the 5-year supply, please feel free to do so now. Oliver Bell.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, it was just an initial point really, was just having regard to the council's matter statement in response to your question. They've really just obviously relying upon the existing housing land supply paper, which is now got it is now on an outdated baseline period, and they've just given you a simple response in terms of it. There'll be some additional 575 units added to the supply. I suppose what I would think would be particularly helpful, obviously we said in our matter statements, a number of others have, in terms of having a more detailed site trajectory, but actually just an updated housing land supply position based on the new monitoring period, given the fact that we've got a step trajectory and therefore that's going to increase the requirement. That's obviously a simple change, but we need to understand more detail on what's now feeding into the supply and the justification to ensure that meets the necessary tests. And I think that information is woefully lacking at the moment.
Thank you. I think it will be helpful for the council to update their 5-year supply, giving the basis for any new figure. So basically what I'm after is a worked table. And I imagine you've got the basis for that with this appeal that you did in April last year at Horsted Keynes. So if you could update the figures in there, that would be very helpful indeed.
So, I mean, I'm not saying we can't do it, but the point you just made that it would be easy given the appeal decision last year, I'm not sure that that follows, because that appeal would have been based on the most recent 5-year housing land supply statement council had at that point in time, which would have been in last year's statement. We're not yet at a point where the statement for this year is due to be published. I can check when that is likely to happen. I mean, we can do an exercise if you want us to of going through and updating it, but there isn't at the moment an official council document that we can point to. I mean, that inquiry interrogated in a far greater level of depth than it is possible to do in the context of this roundtable examination, the council's evidence as it existed at that point in time. And as you might well imagine, sir, the council went uphill and down dale in terms of were its estimates in relation to the trajectory reasonable? Was it reasonable to expect Homes England to produce at the rate that it did? And that sort of evidence would have been gone through in great detail. But it isn't simply a matter of saying we would wheel out for you the evidence that we had at that inquiry, because that evidence, I think those are the various parties around the table would say that evidence suffers from the defect which they're identifying, which is that it hasn't been updated to represent what's happened in the intervening period for this year. As I say, we could do that exercise for you if you felt it would be helpful and necessary, but it's not simply a matter of pulling out of the cupboard a document that already exists.
Right, I fully accept that point, and thank you for your explanation. I think two things. One is, I think, yes, your most recent statement at a local plan level will be helpful. But secondly, if you've still got the data for the last year's inquiry that you presented, I think that in itself would be very helpful, just to see the level that you've gone into, because we're only talking about just over a year after.
Well, we can certainly do the last of those things. So there'll be, if nothing else, a proof of evidence somewhere which contains that information, and you can bring that in the inspector's report. And we'll do what we can in terms of anything that may happen since then. I'm not quite sure how easy that is, but I'm getting nods from around the room, which suggests it might be possible to do something. So
I would have thought, I mean, first of all, we're now a couple of months past the time when these would normally be done anyway. And I know we're into COVID and everything else and things are not normal, but the basic methodology of a 5-year housing land supply doesn't change that much. The figures you put in obviously differ, but the actual methodology is one that Andrew Marsh and his colleagues will be very familiar with.
Indeed, sir. Leave it with us, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you very much. Helena Griffiths, you come in.
So, just to point out, I don't know if the council have updated the 5-year housing supply for a more recent appeal in Horsted Keynes along Birchgrove Road. That appeal was actually took place in March 2021. So I don't know whether they updated their statements or anything like that for that appeal. Just a comment that there's a more up-to-date one.
Thank you.
So I'm told that the 5-year housing land supply was not in issue at that inquiry. I presume people proceeded on the basis of the appeal decision last year, and the developer wasn't challenging that conclusion. So I don't think it's been updated. Ultimately, the evidence to that inquiry doesn't take things any further forward.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to speak on 5-year housing supply? Right, let's just move on. So we come on to 3.5. which is on windfall sites? And is the reliance on the figure realistic? Council states that paragraph 68 of the MPPF encourages local planning authorities to support the development of windfall sites through policies. And their update note shows why an allowance of 84 DPA would be realistic in mid-Sussex. Turley state they're disappointed that the windfall reliance has risen from 450 to 504 DPA. Judith Ashton Associates question the evidence justifying increasing the windfall allowance. Litchfield state that the revised allowance is realistic and justified, so you have an ally there. Although the plan should be relying on allocations rather than an identified sites, maybe a sting in the tail to their response. Denton Homes, windfall developments can be difficult to come by in a district with such a high proportion of its land in the AONB. Windfall should only be relied upon to provide more than the housing delivery target, which is meant to be a minimum and not a maximum. Andrew Black suggests a reason why the figure might have gone up in recent years, and that is because of the new Class O of the General Permitted Development Order, enabling conversions from offices to residential accommodation, and adds that if this is the case, it's unclear whether there is a high degree of certainty that the high rate will continue, and he would therefore, I'm assuming, counselling, keep to your original figure. Okay, who wants to talk about windfalls? Right. I think you're all exhausted after lunch. Nobody wants to say anything. Right. There's nothing on that. I'm going to go on to 3.6, which is additional sites. And basically, the council's confident that its trajectory is robust and does not need to identify any more, which is then followed by a lot of you saying, my site's the best site there is, and we really ought to go for it. So I have a lot of people saying that. I'm not going to go through the list particularly. If anybody wants to particularly draw one out, then I will listen to it. So does anybody want to talk about additional sites? Well, you do surprise me. Helena Griffiths, do come in.
I'd just like to add our site to the list. I didn't formally put in a statement at this level, thinking that I'd put quite a few statements in suggesting that our site was actually suitable.
Right.
But yeah, if you're making a list, put ours on it, please. Thank you.
Right, you're not backwards and coming forwards. There we go. Right, that's 3.7. Anybody? Oh, right, I have a few more people now. Chris Huff. Do come in.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, it was just a case of really that I didn't think you were considering omission sites per se.
No.
And so really although I am one of the ones, I've got a site at Hurstpere Point that I've submitted details of, and is a very good site to add to the
yeah, my own worst enemy
provision.
on this.
But I wasn't going to try and start a flood of people saying, yes, mine's better or anything like that. But I wouldn't want the position to go unnoticed or unmarked.
Can I just say that I take equal weight on written comments as I do on comments made around the table. And I therefore read all the comments that are being made. And I'm very happy to leave them at that. But seeing as I've asked the question, I'm my own worst enemy on this. I'm going to have to listen to you all, I guess. So David Murray Cox next.
Hi, sir. I actually suffered from an internet outage whilst you were speaking there, or at least the sound went, I think. But I picked up the gist of what you probably said from what Mr. Huff said. I probably need to say that we think our site should be on any list you're drawing up, but I'll leave it there.
Fine. Okay, that's very, very brief and helpful. Tundra Tom.
Hi there. Thank you. I'll be very brief as well. It's just to confirm in the Reg 19 rep, we proposed Clearwaters Farm as a reserve site allocation. We've been continuing to undertake technical work on that site, and just to let you know, we'd like it included on any list of emission sites, and it is ready and available to be allocated. And in fact, in our matter statement on matter 3, we did take the opportunity to run through your questions in 3.3 for this site to show you it was a deliverable site. Thank you.
Right, okay. Tim North.
It's a hostage to fortune, this, isn't it, when you start doing this sort of
Yeah,
thing?
I know.
The
I know
terrible
it's
situation. It's like a party. We have to get in on the act. So if you can please, very briefly, just add the site that's owned by my client at the Ivy Dean Industrial Estate in Ashurst Wood.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, Katie Lamb.
Thank you. Just a very quick point. I'm sure there are a number of parties here, but also that are not here that might want to get onto emission sites. So just a point that if you are going to start considering them, you might need to open it a little bit wider than just those in attendance.
I'll make it clear that probably the wrong questions I've asked, but I will be looking at what the plan has submitted in the first instance. It will only be if I come to write any form of interim note that I come to a conclusion that there aren't enough sites. That will be the stage where I'll invite the council to consider further sites. Okay. So Jonathan Buckland.
Thank you. So yeah, just very briefly, I know you've referred to it a couple of times today already, but certainly my client's site at Courthouse Farm, Copthorne, we would like to put on the list, not only for housing, but also for a care home element as part of that as well. Thank you.
Is there anywhere in your documentation when you talk about the size of the care home?
Yes, I believe that is in the reps, but we're looking at around a 75-bed care home.
Right, Gladman, Chris Ball.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, just our proceedings.
Thank you. A very minor point. Our hearing statements don't actually refer to emission sites. They're covered within our Regulation 19 representations. We excluded them on the basis that we didn't want you to, well, that you didn't want to know about them at this point of the examination, but that's not to say that they're not there.
You're absolutely right in what you say, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wish I'd been a bit clearer myself. Right. Have I got anybody else who wants to speak on this, or can I move swiftly on to possibly a slightly safer topic? Let's just, okay. So we come on to 3.8, which is qualitative aspects of housing supply. And the question I ask is there a need for any qualitative parameters for housing provision in the plan, such as provision for affordable housing, starter homes, older persons accommodation, care homes, accessible housing, student housing, self-built housing, and accommodation for gypsies and travellers?
I ask, there are a number of people who still have their hands up from their last contribution. And it may be helpful if they took their hand down before you invited contributions on the next round.
That's very helpful, Mr. Brown. I should have noticed that. I've still got David Murray Cox's hand up, and I've still got Tim Norse. I've still got. Right, that's very helpful. Thank you for your cooperation on that, and thank you for the reminder. Just to finish what I was saying on 3.8, in relation to gypsies and travellers, does the plan enable the implementation of District Plan Policy DP33, which is on that subject? And the council's response to my question is that the DPD is a daughter document of the district plan. As such, all sites are required to meet the policy requirements of the district plan, for example, affordable housing, accessible housing. Therefore, they are not matters within the scope of the DPD. Regarding older persons housing, I'm referred to your document TP4, and the council does not consider it necessary to allocate more sites for C2 or care home use other than sought in SA20. And the council give 3 reasons for that view. Firstly, that the district plan includes facilitative policies such as DP30 to enable specialist accommodation to come forward. Second reason they give is that the rate of development coming forward does not suggest any significant unmet need or excess demand. And third, apart from SA20, which I've just mentioned, no other suitable sites have yet been identified. And also that they have commenced work on the review, which is when they will look at this again. In relation to gypsies and travellers, they make the point that there is a site proposed at SA20 in accordance with DP30 and DP33, and the gypsy and traveller requirement will be reviewed as part of the review. I've mentioned the local plan review. So in response to that, DHA planning refers me to the Alborn appeal decision, which established that there is a significant level of current unmet need for Class 2 older persons accommodation, which will significantly increase over the plan period. That decision concluded that there is now a need for between 244 and 552 extra care units in Mid-Sussex. The inspector criticised the council for failure to recognise the unmet need that is, in her words, clearly evident. Belton Wilmore for the Retirement Village Developments Limited and Notcuts Limited state that it falls within the scope of this plan to address the need and any shortfall in the provision of specialist accommodation, including extra care housing, as set out in policies DP25 and DP30. The council's note TP4 is at odds with the Alborn inspector, and as they comment, no material change has happened since Alborn, and the MPPF paragraph 61 strengthened its guidance regarding older persons housing, and that there should be clear policies and indicative targets. And it suggests a main modification to set out a new policy. Then we come on to Turley for Rainier Developments, and they state that the shortfall in older persons accommodation needs to be addressed by this plan. And they quote from interim findings of the Aylesbury Vale local plan inspector. He states, quote, specialised housing and care homes cannot simply be pepper potted as a percentage of general mainstream housing, but need to be provided collectively in institutional or quasi-institutional groupings within a substantial, I should hasten to say, critical mass sufficient to pay for the sufficient support services which are provided. And it goes on to say, nor does it appear to include any allocations or policy provision for sheltered housing schemes or any of the other categories of non-mainstream housing for older people described in national guidance. And that Inspector Clark, then stated, consequently, it does not demonstrate that it provides for these housing needs for older people, and it's therefore is unsound in that respect. So does the council want to come in first, or do you want to hear what other people have to say?
I'm very happy to hear what other people have to say, sir, on the basis that, as I said yesterday, having set out our stall on this twice, I think the answer today at the end of it is still going to be much the same. But I'll hear the comments and come back at the end if I may.
Right. So who would like to make comments? Lucy Wilford.
Good afternoon again. I've got a few points to run through, and we obviously touched on this subject yesterday, so I'll try to keep it to those sort of matters, and they principally revolve around 2 points. One is the need and the adequacy of the policy response. And just to clarify, when we talk about need, we're talking about extra care needs, and that's specifically what the Alborn decision decided upon, not other forms of care provision. So parking the issue for a second on whether the council needs to allocate source or not, or how it chooses to address the need. The starting point is the need for specialist accommodation is included in the council's housing figures. So therefore, any residual requirement is therefore to be addressed through this plan. This is, of course, in the context that accommodation for the elderly counts towards supply, and that's set out in the PPG at ID 63, paragraph 60A. And the current adopted local plan deferred this issue to now. The council continues to miss the qualitative dimension in meeting the housing requirement in DP4. It's not just a numbers game, and I refer back to the council's comments earlier in this regard. To that extent, policies DP25 and DP30 require qualitative analysis and consideration of whether the need for special accommodation needs to. This flows from an objective of the district plan itself, which we pointed to yesterday, that requires to provide the amount and type of housing that meets the needs of all sectors of the community. For the council to do this, it follows there must be an up-to-date assessment of need. The NPPF requires this at paragraph 31. The council's evidence does not include any consideration or analysis for specialist accommodation. Again, yesterday we pointed to this in the essay as just one example. We've made extensive representations on the council site selection process, which does not take into account the need for specialist accommodation and sustainability credentials. The only evidence we have on the matter is actually topic paper 4. This was produced after the Reg 19 consultation concluded. It relies on out-of-date evidence and advises there's no need for specialist accommodation. Although it was acknowledged by the council yesterday, there is a need for C2 leasehold, extra care, and we do welcome that. But putting it simply, the council has not fulfilled the requirements of DP25 and DP30, which at least requires proper consideration of the need before the council can come to an informed decision of the need for a policy or response. Indeed, policy DP30 explicitly states that evidence of housing need will be based on the best available evidence. We know from the Alborn decision this is not the council's evidence, but the evidence we provided, and refer you to paragraphs 90 and 93 of that decision, with an identified need of at least 665 additional extra care units, of which 570 should be leasehold. And that was of September 2020. And just to note, the supply has not changed since that time. Then turning back to the policy response, the council's position that policy DP30 advises the council will consider allocating sites is not a requirement. Policy DP25, which is also relevant, is more explicit and states that community facilities, and this includes extra care, will be identified through the neighbourhood plans or site allocation document. We already know that the need is not being met through the local plans, which is us with the site allocation DPD. And indeed, the Alcorn decision, and again, the point to paragraph 93, gives tacit expected this plan look to address the need. However, turning to the PPG and the new sections and older persons accommodation, it is clear that the need to provide older persons accommodation is critical. And again, that's at ID 63, paragraph 001, the opening sentence. Furthermore, the PPG states the council should plan to provide for specialist housing where need exists. Again, ID 63, paragraph 12. Whilst the PPG leaves it open as to how to address the need, the requirement is clear that plans should address it. This is not a new need, yet the council's approach has so far not to encourage or support delivery. The council's position then, so why in the context of its own policies, current national guidance and a very recent appeal decision that the council resists making further allocations of policy interventions, there is evidence or need, which is duplicated in TP4, was found to be flawed and was unequivocally determined there is a significant unmet need for specialist accommodation, which the council is failing to acknowledge and address. And again, we point to paragraph 93 of the appeal. We note the comments yesterday about relying on existing allocations. The allocation at Imberhorn is not sufficient to address the identified need, and we've set out at length in representations why other allocated housing sites do not meet the significant need. And unless the council is able to point to more updated discussions with the promoters, I have looked at the council's response to your questions. The document's titled 02CII.
You might have missed a bit of your sentence there, Lucy. Could you just go back over that last sentence?
Oh, to do with the allocations.
Yeah, you broke up.
It's simply, sorry, that the Imberhorn site isn't sufficient to address the need. So we've already set out at length why other allocated housing sites will not meet that significant need. We set that out in our matter statement 3. And that is unless the council is able to advise of any of the promoters of the allocated sites, which have confirmed they're going to include extra care housing, since they seem to be relying on other sites being able to come forward and meet this need. So I've gone through the council's response to your questions, their document MSDC02C, and this certainly doesn't suggest that any of those sites would come forward for anything other than housing, again, notwithstanding Imberhorn. And what we're left with is a situation if the council chooses not to address the need in this plan, which we believe it is required to do in accordance with the local plan and national guidance, then the alternative position is simply planning by appeal, which is surely the process that this plan is designed to avoid. To assist this session, we have offered solutions to addressing that need, which we think is possible to deal within this plan, and the council is required to do so. Then we obviously put forward as a development control policy and also suggested the allocation of Alborn.
Is that have you finished on that?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I covered the points from yesterday.
Can I just ask you, on the allocation of Alborn, what would be the advantage of putting it in the local plan?
It's to secure its delivery, as with other sites that have also got planning permission. They've also been allocated within the site allocations document.
Okay.
Oh, my last point was yesterday, I think a task was left with the council. It did say that it didn't think it was able to address the need of this local plan. And I thought they would be coming back on that today.
Okay. Thank you for that. David Murray Cox.
Thank you, sir. Yes, this is on behalf of Rainier Developments. The first point to note is that meeting the needs of older people is not, as I think the council have suggested, something which is out with the SA DPD. If that were the case, then the text in policy DP30 would not be there. The reality is that this is a sensitive topic. We're talking about real people with real needs, and it's not appropriate to kick the can down the road, as our statement suggests the council is doing. Sorry. The fact that the evidence does show a need exists is demonstrated in the 2016 HEDNAR. It's also demonstrated in the appeal decision to which you've just been referred to, and it's also demonstrated in the evidence appended to our client's statement, which addresses the sort of the more traditional care home part of the spectrum. More fundamentally, as far as I can tell, the need is recognised by the local authority. For example, there's the statement of case agreed in the Albourne appeal, and there's also the Inverhorn allocation. If there was no need, then why would the SADPD seek a proportion of that scheme as a care community? It's also important to note that the HEDNAR is, as Ms Wilford just mentioned, the council's evidence. I don't think there's anything that's been updated since then. However, if it is the evidence, then that does show a need. The issue is, I don't think anyway, not whether a need exists. That should be beyond dispute. The issue comes down to what and whether you do about it. And the council relies on three factors: the permissive approach in DP30, the Inverhorn allocation, the suggestion that other sites could provide for older persons accommodation, and this point that perhaps the market isn't there. However, the reality is that the amalgamation of these has already been shown to be flawed. If the permissive approach worked, then you would see active provision. Schemes would be coming forward. The reality is that the permissive approach is being engaged, but only via the Section 78 process. Given the scale of need identified in the HEDNA and the various documents to which I referred to, it's not the market that we say is flawed, but the policy and development management approach being applied to it. In relation to the Inverhorn allocation, the council's reliance on that is flawed because it's for an unspecified amount. And as you just heard, the reliance upon other sites is hopeful at best. As Ms Wilford said, there's no indication that those sites will come forward for anything other than C3 housing. What we heard yesterday seems to be at odds with the suggestion that there is no issue to grapple with, but more that there are no sites. But the reality is that there are sites, including the land promoted by Rainier at Crawley Down. Now that's subject to a live planning application, and there are no outstanding technical matters. My understanding is that the only reason why permission has not been granted is because it's outside of a settlement. The topic paper that you have now been produced by the local authority suggests this site was one of a number rejected due to its alleged conflict with the strategy. But just as you heard yesterday about housing sites more generally, if the strategy isn't capable of identifying the sites, then you need to review the strategy. It's clear that the council does acknowledge a need through the various comments you've heard, because otherwise, again, it wouldn't be saying this is something for the district plan review. And coupled with the content of both the district plan, the adopted one, and the SADPD, that is not currently a positive approach to meet what is an existing growing need. And just as your colleague found in Aylesbury, we therefore consider this is a matter of soundness. It goes to the heart of whether this plan provides suitable accommodation for the different groups in the area. And the local authority should therefore seek opportunities to put in place that positive framework in the manner first envisaged by the district plan in 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Lamb, did you want to come back again? Yes?
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Do come in, Katie. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just very quickly. Obviously, we just heard from two parties there on C2 care. Just thought it might be helpful. Mrs. Wilford suggests there's no evidence to support the SADPD on this matter. Of course, document H4 is the council's HEDNA update 2016, which supported the district plan as well. Of course, this being the daughter document to that. That sets out the need there. And again, just to reiterate, again, as Mr. Murray Cox has helpfully said, that SA20 will deliver an element of care through its delivery. And to suggest that the number of units isn't known, in our site library at SA 20.9, there's a care village capacity sketch layout which suggests how many units could be delivered on site. And as it's required in the description of development in the policy, that will be coming forward as part of the wider scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Michael Brown, CPRE.
Thank you, sir. Just a very quick question. There's nobody here today really to speak up for those who are less well off. And I would just ask whether you think you have enough evidence that the allocations proposed will enable the council to meet the local need that it now exists for affordable homes.
Good question. Well, there's clearly a number of sites that have got viability issues, and so therefore I think there'll be a challenge there. It really probably shouldn't be one for me to answer in the first instance. We'll get the council to, in fact, give you an answer on that one, or we'll ask them to. So we're left. James Donner. That's all that's coming up on my screen. Is that right?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Retirement Village Developments and Not Cuts Limited. I just wanted to draw attention to a couple of salient points around the Allbond decision. I think it's right to say that dealt with extra care housing, which is a particular type of specialist housing need. I've heard reference to C2 housing, C2 provision, and of course there is no such thing. We're talking about specialist housing that could be housing with care like extra care, or it could be retirement housing with care available through a buzzer, or you might also be talking about accommodation in care homes or nursing homes. And so I think it's important to make the point that the Orban decision took the view that there was a pressing unmet need for extra care housing. And I wouldn't want the case to be misrepresented, that just because specialist housing was being provided elsewhere, it also addresses extra care need, because that isn't the case. We worked with the council at Alban. We agreed that the pipeline supply was all affordable social rent, extra care, and that there was no leasehold extra care in the pipeline, despite the fact that most older people in Mid-Sussex are owner-occupiers. Hence the inspector's view at Alban that there was a pressing need for leasehold extra care. There is one scheme only for residents of Mid-Sussex, 56 units for many thousands of older owner-occupiers, a significant proportion of whom might require care in an independent setting. So that's
the only one in Mid-Sussex?
There is only one at the moment.
And where is that?
That is at Corbett Court in Burgess Hill. And
have you got a few? Sorry, do carry on. Sorry.
No, that was the point really, and I felt yesterday or the day before, the council suggested, well, this is a narrow area of need. Well, it's a huge area of unmet need for a requirement that most older residents in Mid Sussex are likely to look for if they wish to continue living independently as owner occupiers, with care available 24/7 on site.
These quite high figures that have been put forward for the extent of unmet need, these are just for this extra care element, yes?
That's correct. Leasehold extra care is the specific focus of the Auburn inspector's decision, and so her conclusion, significant level of current unmet need for extra care leasehold housing. And so the figures the figures that Ms. Wilford quoted and are quoted by the inspector in the Auburn decision are all leasehold extra care figures. And it was on that basis that she determined that there was a significant level of unmet need.
What about more general need for older persons housing? What kind of figure would you put on that?
Well, the council has said there is unmet need for all types of specialist housing, but the greatest need is for extra care, and that has been the case since they conducted their appraisal or their assessment, sorry, in 2016. The only notional oversupply is in care homes with nursing care, and that's a completely different product.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your information there. Do I have anybody else on this matter who would like to speak? Right, so James Donner, you've just spoken, so I presume you're going to put your hand down. David Murray Cox, have you got something new to say?
I do, sir. Thank you. It's just some figures to help with your last question to Mr. Donner. Page 7 of our matter statement for today for Rainier talks about the council's evidence of a shortfall of 251 C2 bed spaces. This is in the care home sector in 2020, rising to 269 in 2030. Rainier's
again
269 in 2030.
Okay.
The evidence submitted by Rainier shows that on their calculations there's a shortfall of 552 in 2020, rising to 665 in 2030. So whilst Mr. Donner's points were about the extra care part of the spectrum, of course, it's really important to remember that it is broader than that as well.
Thank you for that. Anybody else on any aspect of quantitative provision? If not, can I ask the council to respond to what Michael Brown said about affordable housing? He's basically asking, is the provision within the submitted plan of a sufficient range to enable the council's affordable housing needs as set out in the district plan implementable?
So I'm going to ask Mr. Marsh to deal with that, although I suspect his answer is going to be that there are policies in the district plan which require a proportion of all sites coming forward over 10 units to contribute to affordable housing. Those policies will continue to apply to allocations in the district plan. Those policies will have been subject to viability assessment at the time, and therefore satisfied that although there might be inevitably individual sites where some figure less than the requirement is accepted on the basis of a viability assessment, in the main, it will be expected that sites deliver at that level. I suspect, I don't know, but Mid Sussex would be unusual if it was not in the position of most authorities, which is that, generally speaking, even extracting the maximum amount from market sites, you're lucky if you get near meeting the total affordable housing need, but there is a requirement or an expectation that there will be providers who come forward with 100% sites that go some way towards making up the difference. But I'll pass to Mr. Marsh to tell you if I've got any of that wrong.
I dare you to tell your barrister you got it wrong.
No, I'm happy to confirm that was all absolutely correct. The discussion about affordable housing and the link between that, increasing any type of supply to meet affordable housing, that was all discussed at the district plan at great length. And as Mr. Brown said, we have policies in the district plan which are then repeated as we mentioned yesterday in SAGN that mean that sites will be assessed on that basis, and on an individual basis there may be reasons why they may not deliver, and there are some sites that may deliver more. That's exactly the point, nothing more to add.
So are you reasonably confident then that you've got a range and mix of sites over 10 units which will not present you with very difficult viability situations where you'll be able to deliver what the district plan is asking you to deliver or committing you to deliver?
I think we discussed in 3.9 the next item the different range of sites that we've got to this plan, and that's
we'll come on to it then. That's fine. Thank you. So that's a nice lead in to 3.9.
Might I just say a little bit more about C2? I don't necessarily want to go back over points that Mr. Tunnell made yesterday in overall terms, but can I just stress, in terms of the question of need, Mr. Tunnell yesterday made the point that this is not a site allocations plan that turns its back on the question of C2. And so it's worth noting that even in the district plan, under the strategic allocations, if you look, for example, at the strategic allocation for Pease Pottage, DP10, within the expectations of what that site will provide, there is first of all a hospice, which I know is not C2 care in the sense that Ms. Wilford is interested in, but it is nonetheless an extremely important aspect of provision. But also on page 49 of that, the developments are expected to bring forward a range of housing, including housing for older people. So not specifically C2 extra care, but there is a definite nod or a recognition of the fact that there needs to be an element of provision for older people in that. And so you've seen the same thing in the SADPD in a slightly different respect in terms of Imberhorn. You also heard from Mr. Tunnell yesterday that this wasn't a question of us rejecting sites that have been put forward because they were C2 and we were not going to provide for C2 needs. To the extent that people came forward with C2 sites, those were rejected on the grounds of the sustainability in accordance with the assessment process in the sustainability appraisal. So what I wanted to add, just on the point of need, is this. You heard, and I'm very grateful to Ms. Lamb for her taking you to the HEDNA, which underlay the district plan. Of course, when the site allocations DPD began the process of being put together, that was our starting point. At that stage, it was up-to-date evidence. It is worth pointing out, although you've had understandable reliance placed on the Alborn decision, prior to the Alborn decision, the most recent appeal decision this council had on the question of accommodation for the elderly, special care accommodation, was an appeal decision which upheld the council's view that there was no need. If we had been having this examination at this time last year, the latest evidence based on the latest inspector's decision would have been there is no need that we need to cater for. Now, sir, I recognise Albourne moves things on a stage from that process, but you will have noted the date of that decision, September last year, precisely the same point as the Regulation 19 document. And so you will, I'm sure, understand the problem that all development plans have, is that they are put together against a constantly shifting backdrop, both in terms of policy and the levels of evidence that are out there. And if one stopped to update them for the latest appeal decision, the latest piece of information that came through, one would never ever get to the stage of actually submitting something for examination. It's a never-ending process. There has to come a point at which you draw the line. We take on board the fact that the Albourne inspector, contrary to the previous decision, found that there was a need, found against the council on that issue. Of course we do. But does that mean that we should stop the SADPD in its tracks, turn it round and go through the process again? No, it doesn't. Not least of all, sir, because as you've now heard from not one, but a couple of the participants, Albourne was concerned with a particular aspect of need. To the extent that there was evidence which focused on that, it is only a part of the overall picture. And what is needed, and readily accept that it is needed, but there is an overall review of the situation, and that is the work that the council is currently doing to inform its district plan. And that is, in our submission, the most sensible way of taking this forward. I note Ms. Ulford's suggestion that there should now be an allocation for the Albourne site. I have to say, sir, in circumstances where they have a permission, I find that rather surprising. You'll have your own experience of this, but in mine, at least, at this stage in a local plan, if you've got a proposed allocation which obtains planning permission, the normal step at that stage is to take it off the allocations list because allocations have served their purpose. Albourne is now there. It's got a consent. It may well be, I don't know. Perhaps Ms. Wilford wants an allocation so her clients can come back second bite of the cherry and ask for more. But the point is they already have a permission. The principle of that development on that site has now been established, and that will in due course go forward to meet the need. But allocating it is not going to assist you very much in terms of whether or not the site allocations DPD meets a need. It's a commitment at the moment, effectively. Thank you, sir.
Right, thank you for that. I'm still mulling over in my mind, as you imagine, what to do about this. And I will let you know very shortly what my view is. So we need to go on to 3.9, which is, as Mr. Marsh was saying, size of housing allocations, are they appropriate to address the qualitative requirements of the district? And the council's view is that DP30 provides a policy mix to ensure that housing size and type meet all the needs across the community. That you've got, again, SA Gen policy helping out. That the allocations range from 12 units to 550 units, wide variety of dwelling types, and a range of site sizes. Bottom Wilmore take a different view, and that affordable extra care housing is typically viable from 50 to 100 units, and only 9 allocations meet this threshold. But at least the former Hazelden nursery site, which we've just been talking about, should be allocated for circa 117 units. Does anybody else want to come in on 3.9? Right, okay, we're almost there. I ask as my final question, are there any other housing issues which the plan should be addressing? Council's view is that we've done it all. Don't need to open any more avenues on this. Andrew Black Consulting states that sites at Haywards Heath and Felbridge, additional sites, represent significant opportunities to strengthen the housing supply for the district in light of significant issues with several of the allocated sites. Mr. Black, did you want to just come in and explain why those two particular locations feature in your answer?
For that explanation, because Felbridge isn't in the district, so we're slightly puzzled by that at the moment.
Right. Andrew Black, can you help us? Right, well, he may have gone. I'll have to remind myself to ask him that question on another day.
Perhaps he had childcare responsibilities.
Possibly.
I'm just picking up on your comment this morning, sir, that if people did, they shouldn't feel embarrassed to slip away. So
well, that's absolutely right, and I don't want people to feel they're disadvantaged because they're caring. Are there any other comments anybody wants to make on the housing issues that we've discussed today? We've got a few minutes. I'm willing to listen to anybody else, but I don't want to artificially prolong it. I'm going to take it that that is it. We've come to the end.
Sarah, I've got my hand up.
You've got a couple.
I've got two here. Judith Ashton.
Thank you, sir. I was just really going to ask about the arrangements for dealing with the statements of common ground and the other information you've asked of Mid Sussex in terms of other parties being able to then come back and comment on those, because as you'll appreciate, a number of us didn't say anything on the 5-year housing land supply debate because in effect it's going to be superseded by whatever we receive. I personally didn't see the point in wasting your time talking about something that's kind of old hat at the moment.
Okay. I realise I've given the council very little time on this, and
so
can you help me on?
I've taken the best instructions I can, and as I indicated earlier, it's made slightly more complicated because it's not just a matter of what we can do in-house, it's also a matter of speaking to other people. So I'm not going to absolutely promise this, but bearing in mind we have 2 non-sitting days next week, we'll do our very best to have something to you before we resume next Thursday. If we can get it earlier than that and we can distribute it to the parties, we will do. But that is when, at the moment, we think there is a reasonable chance of being able to do it before, say, close of play on Wednesday, Thursday morning. It's not a hard and fast promise, so please forgive me if for reasons outside our control we can't make it. But I think realistically, it would be ambitious and foolish of me to suggest that it's going to be any sooner than that.
Mr. Brown, thank you for a very helpful comment. I appreciate the endeavours you are going to on this, and obviously I wish you well on that. I don't know if Judith Ashton wants to come back on that.
Just briefly, sir, in terms of then the timescales you would provide those of us that are taking part today to come back, or what arrangements you're intending to make.
Well, I think once we've got that, then I will obviously set a time for everybody else to contribute to the statement of common ground. Let's see where we are next Thursday. It's a 3-week examination hearing session, so we have got some more time.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Lucy Wilford again.
It was to come back very briefly just on a couple of the council's points. One of that was the evidence the council relied upon an all-board appeal and was found to be out of date and flawed. Although in itself it did also identify the need for extra care. The other inquiry that was referred to, that was for a speculative development, and that was principally for a care home. And then the last point regarding the allocation, the simple point was, why wouldn't you allocate to help address the need? And yes, we have promoted it for more units, and we've set that out in our matter statements, which would help address the need we've identified.
On your comments about the other inquiry, do you know what the date of that was, or roughly when it was?
It was roughly, I think, a year before ours. I think it was 2019.
So it's quite recent.
It's quite recent, yes.
Right. So on an Alborn, you're basically saying more units and a bit more ambitious, therefore an allocation would assist.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Anybody else wants to say anything? Right, in that case, I think we're all good to go, and we'll start tomorrow morning at 9:30 and start on the individual allocations. Okay, thank you. We're now closed.
Thank you very much, sir.